Bonjour, bonjour, mes amis. It is lovely to be here with you this evening. I hope this finds you all well. Welcome to this DNA Co webinar where we are going to be exploring all things genes, all things diet, and all things buggies and critters and things that live in your stomach that influence your diet. Um, Tonight, I'm joined by the most wonderful Justin Harris and the most magnanimous Dr. Laura Varden, and we're going to be exploring a few things with you. So, first of all, we are going to demystify why there's no such thing as the perfect diet and why generic advice of eat less, move more isn't always the best advice. We're going to explore exactly what is nutrigenomics and how your DNA influences what you should be eating and how your body's going to show up in the world. And then we're also going to be exploring how you can take insights like that and really bring them into your day-to-day life and how you can leverage that for your best health. So for those that are in the audience that already have our DNA 360, I really encourage you right now to go find that, to go grab that, because we are going to be talking about a few specific genes. If you're like me and you're always doing things in the last minute and maybe don't have it, I'd encourage you to download our app. It's called the DNA Way app. And through that, you can very quickly access your genes. So we'll make sure we toss that into the comments so that you can quickly access that app. So, Dr. Varden, Justin, good day, good afternoon, good evening. How are you guys?
Good.
Doing
Good to
quite
be here.
well, thank you.
Look at that Canadian traffic jam. I'm excited to chat
Just
about this
talk
because
over
I
each other.
think it tends to be one of the more common things, right, that we see in our clinic of I have this health goal. How on earth do I eat in order to support that?
Yeah, and it's really this is one of my favorite topics because I love food. I like to eat food. I like to talk about food. But I think that in 2025, this really represents an interesting area because this is the first time in human history where we've had 24/7 availability of calories, right? They're
Mhm.
everywhere and you don't even have to earn them
Right.
anymore. They're just right there. It's something that you can go and
Yeah.
grab. And like 90% of them are just something that resembles food, but it's not necessarily what our ancestors would have looked at and been like, that's nutrition right there.
Mhm.
Then on top of that, we've got this thing where we've got influencers everywhere and social media is really prevalent. And all it takes is to follow the wrong influencer, wrong for you, that is. And you can end up trying a diet that might even be metabolically harmful for you. Right. So
Yeah.
it's like we've got this option paralysis. There's so many different
Mm.
diets to sort of choose from. And I think that's a pretty new thing to the human experience. So here we are, and we got to find a way to navigate and find the one that's actually going to not only work well for your metabolism,
Yeah.
but also aid your goals, right? Like, do you have
Mhm.
athletic goals? Do you have cognitive goals? Are you trying to combat some sort of disease, gut issue? Nutrition is one of your biggest weapons. Like I always say,
Mhm.
it's an epigenetic input that we have control over 3 times a day, every day. So it's always got to be one of our top priorities as far as a healthcare plan.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Thank you. So, for audience, if that wasn't teaser enough, I want to offer two different things. First of all, sprinkled throughout this webinar, you're going to hear some discount codes. So, if you're interested in any of the testing and would like to get at a discount, stay tuned. You will hear those. And before we dive in, because I want to start that conversation off around the myth of the perfect diet. Um, I wonder if Vanny or Katie, you can display our poll questions. So, audience, Dr. Varden, Justin, and myself, we really show up to the end of how can we serve you? How can we offer you what you want to know? And so we ask poll questions to that end. So, Vanny or Katie, can you toss up the poll questions for me? There we go. Merci. All right. The first question we asked you, audience, was have you ever followed a popular diet that didn't work for you? And about half the audience here says yes multiple times. And then about 26% has said, no, I have never tried a popular diet. I'm curious from that 26%, and feel free to use the chat for this. Is that because you've personalized your diet or you just straight up haven't done a diet? I'm curious about the answer to that one. The next question we asked is what's your biggest challenge when it comes to nutrition? And about 60% of the audience, why you're all here today, is saying what's actually right for the body, right? And then the next one kind of being consistent around it. And we'll make sure we speak to both elements, because I think it's one thing to know what is best for you, and then the next biggest challenge, Dr. Varden, Justin, I'm sure you'd agree, is how do you actually implement that when all those pretend foods are calling your name? The next question we asked was, how do you think, what do you think influences your body's response to food? Um, Interesting. About 42% of the audience is saying gut biome. Interesting. So I'm excited to have that little buggy conversation with you all. There's about 2% that said other. So those that selected other, please make sure you toss into the chat what exactly other is so that we can make sure we address that. Um, and then 22% is saying DNA. Um, the next question we asked is, how personalized is your current approach to nutrition? About 60% or 60% is saying very or somewhat personalized. 20%, we have some hardcore biohackers. They're saying very personalized. So hopefully we're able to add to that. And especially for those that don't know that personalization, make sure you have your DNA 360 ready so we can add to that. The last question that we asked here is, would you be interested in using your genetic insights to guide your nutrition? Those that said yes, definitely, feel free to toss a yes as well into the chat. We have some people that can reach out to you and support those next steps if that's what you're interested in. Yeah. All right, guys. So, Dr. Varden, I'm gonna start with you. Let's talk about this idea, or maybe it's a very natural hope that there's this one size fits all diet, and then the equivalent nightmare of it doesn't actually work. Let's talk about that. Why isn't there a diet that doesn't work for everyone? Because I want it to be there to be one.
That'd be wonderful. Because we have different genetics. Really, it really comes down to what we call nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. And when we look at your reports, and really this is focusing more on the diet nutrition sections of your report. So if you've grabbed your reports and you've got them open and you want to know what system do I go to, this is the one that we're mainly going to be talking about. Yes, there are other aspects and other genes that will be sprinkled throughout that also affect the foods that we eat, how we process those nutrients, etc. And we will be offering those genes that do influence that. But really, that's going to be the meat of where we're focusing a lot of, and yes, pun intended, where we're going to be focusing a lot of the genetic aspects of your blueprint. But getting back to nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. So we are really looking at your report through the lens in two ways, through these two things, nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics. And they are often interchanged, but are actually very different things. Now, both deal with the interplay of nutrients and genes. But in nutrigenetics, this looks at the genes and the variations within our genes and how they influence the efficiency, absorption, and activation of the nutrients we take in. Where nutrigenomics, on the other hand, looks at how those nutrients come back and interact with the genes, affecting gene expression. And this is where Justin was talking about the epigenetic influence of the nutrients we take in. So because each of us has variations in our genes, for example, let's take the BCMO1 gene. Okay, so this deals with beta carotene monooxygenase. This is what converts vitamin A that we get from vegetables, okay, and turns it into a form that we can actually use, which is the form of retinol or retinol palmitate, that particular form of vitamin A. That's what we use. So that gene helps in that conversion. Some people are not very good at that conversion, in which case they need to take it in the form that's already been converted for us, which is usually done by mammals, by animals. And so therefore, this can help specify the form that you need to get the nutrients you need. Vitamin A is very, very important for our bodies. So this is the power that your DNA 360, this information provides to help you personalize the diet plan, the types of foods that will work best for you.
Yeah. So for Marianne and those that are wondering where that gene that Dr. Varden just mentioned, if you're in your diet and nutrition, you can go to the summary section, or you can go to the section called micronutrients, and you'll find that there. It's BCM01. Am I clocking that correctly? Yeah. So
That is correct. Beta
thank you.
carotene monooxygenase 1.
Yeah.
That's what it stands for.
And so to kind of come back to this idea of nutrigenetics versus nutrigenomics, the nutrigenetics is really going to say how your body receives that beta carotene, or do you need a more active retinol form? And then the nutrigenomics kind of talks about the consequence of, if you're not getting properly nourished with that, what downstream effects that's going to have on your genes. Is that a fair summary there, Dr. Varden?
Absolutely. Very
Yeah.
beautifully said.
Yeah. So it's a two-way conversation, right? And so, Justin, I would imagine then that this really lends to that element of personalization that you're never going to get in kind of this overarching diet advice that is prescripted for everyone.
Yeah, because it's like, so what Dr. Varden basically just said is that your genes influence your nutrition, and then your nutrition influences your gene expression. So it's a two-way street, right? It's two sides to the same coin. And I think that that's why we use genes as a pretty reliable way to navigate this whole conversation. Because if we don't use these sorts of markers and we're left to sort of listen to influencers or the government or whatever it is, understand one thing: influencers, they followed their own method and they arrived at their own conclusion. And I think it's a good thing sometimes. Like I'll use Paul Saladino as a great example of that, who I have tons of respect for. Seems like a great guy, and I believe his intention is correct with promoting animal-based diets. Remember, Paul Saladino had some sort of autoimmune thing going on. I believe he had eczema, something that was getting kicked off by these plant toxins, right? So he tried all kinds of stuff in keto and paleo, and he just couldn't quite resolve what that issue looked like. So these influencers, they follow their own path and they end up sort of viewing nutrition through a particular lens, right? So now that's the lens Paul Saladino looks at things through. I'm looking at things through the lens of plant defense chemicals cause autoimmunity, and if everybody just eats this way, it means that there's not going to be any autoimmunity anymore. The problem with that is that, he arrived at a conclusion. It worked for him. He was able to resolve the eczema. Fantastic. The problem is when you turn around and you say that all 7 billion of us should follow that same diet because it is the ideal human diet, you're completely taking the bio-individuality out of it, because I might have totally different enzyme expression than he does. I might have a totally different gut microbiome, mucosal barrier, genetic expression, etc. Right? So it's anybody who says this is the one, this is the one size fits all diet for the human population. There's no way that that's correct, because we know that there's been plenty of full civilizations that ate tons of carbohydrates, variable plant intake, and didn't have autoimmunity, didn't have diabetes, obesity, heart disease, etc. So that's the whole point, is that when we talk about epigenetics and when we talk about gene expression, we're really trying to dial down what makes sense for your body. And you could follow a carnivore influencer and say, well, this makes sense, or a plant-based influencer and say that makes sense. We need a tool. We need actual info about how your cells have been programmed, because all of these diets are fine. It's just they might not be the one for you. So I think that that's why we use genes, because they're reliable. It's been tested and figured out. And it's something that you can use as a guiding document, the DNA 360, to figure out where you land on that huge spectrum that is food consumption.
And we can never not think about the gut biome, because we are not what we eat. We are what the gut biome breaks down and allows us to absorb. So depending on the microdiversity, the microbiome diversity, the types
Mm.
of species that are in there. If you have any type of dysbiosis, more
Mm.
pathogenic species, less keystone beneficial species that work in the breakdown of the foods that you eat into packets of information we can actually utilize, there's going to be an issue. But the
Yeah.
nice thing is that with the gut biome, that's a transient thing. That is changeable. And
Mhm.
through diet, through lifestyle, through, manipulating a toxic load and lowering that toxic load, thankfully that can change. But your DNA does not. So you
Mm.
have to marry the information, know where your strengths are, know where your weaknesses are, and work from there. And also test, don't guess.
Mm.
Know what's going on. Your DNA 360, that's a one and done because that's not going to change. But your gut biome, taking a test like our Gut 360 Premium, that can tell you what's going on right now.
Mm.
What is the terrain of your microbiome? Because if you do have issues, well, a lot of disease starts in the gut, and that is the basis of your immune system. So for sensitivities, for flares of skin issues, you can look at that to see where some
Mhm.
manipulation can happen, so you can fortify yourself and help yourself get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, I wanna really um give the audience some lived experience, some lived
Mhm.
examples of how you guys have worked with clients leveraging testing, not guessing, right? To support people. So in a second, I'm going to ask each of you for your experience there. But audience, I want to remind you, if you have any questions for Dr. Varden, for Justin, for myself, please do add them to the Q&A box. We will be transitioning into questions and answers soon. We really want to hear from you. We want to ensure that we're supporting you. And because I'm a little devil and I commit the company to things that the company's not aware of, we're going to give away something. We are going to give away something super secret. Um, Super secret because I don't know what it is yet, but it's going to be so delightful. We're going to give something away to one of my more favorite questions of the evening. So, as you have your questions, as you're listening, if anything you're inspired to ask, please toss that into the Q&A and we will pick my favorite question at the end of the night. All right. Um,
Very fun.
yeah. Yeah, it's going to be super secret. You'll get a super secret thing. Um, all right. And that's because we just don't know. But I love it. I love committing the company to things they don't know about. All right. Justin, why don't you start? Can you give me an example of a client that you've worked with where once you learned their genes, that really changed the way that you supported their health goals? Give me an example there.
That's been a relatively frequent occurrence, honestly. Like
Mm.
people, and I'll say especially with keto, I think keto has been one of the bigger, I don't want to call it a fad because there's, a time and place for it. And there's people who it works fantastically for. And there's a lot of, medical uses for it. So I don't mean to disparage any diet I might bring up tonight, except maybe the standard American diet. But uh, keto in particular, there's been a lot of people who come to me that's what they're trying, right? They're on some sort of ketogenic diet and they may or may not be doing it correctly in the first place, right? So this is a whole conversation I have because I've had people show up doing dirty keto, and it's like I've seen a lot of problems with people doing dirty keto. But I've had people come to me that are on this ketogenic diet and they're really just like piling the fat in, right? It's like, oh, butter, coffee, and then it's like eggs and avocados and MCTs, and they're just going fat, fat, fat. And not only that, but they're restricting the heck out of carbohydrates and protein a lot of the time.
Mhm.
And I've seen clients come to me and just say, this doesn't make sense. And they'll come like, they blow the millimolar into the thing and they're telling me what their ketone breath like numbers are. And they're telling me how many grams of fat they're eating and how they're like, I've had less than 20 grams of carbs every day. And yet here I am gaining weight. So I've had that happen before. And I kind of, I right away go into the genes and I see that they have suboptimal insulin mechanism, A. which is TCF7L2. That's an important player when it comes to macronutrients. And then we have a gene directly associated with fat metabolism called APOA2. And I had people come to me that were on a full-blown keto diet that were suboptimal in both of those areas. Needless to say, I was not shocked to find out that that diet was not the one for them. They were gaining weight on it. They had metabolic issues going on, low energy, etc. And all we had to do was dial back the fat. I added in usually some sort of carb cycling element because that seems to be useful for even if you have suboptimal insulin response from the TCF7L2. I don't switch them aggressively, right? We kind of just take a few things and tweak for now. I up the protein a little bit, reduced the fat, added in some carb cycling, and lo and behold, their brain felt better. Their body actually started putting muscle on. I've had that happen over and over again. I would say with keto, it's the biggest theme, but I've had people on carnivore that we added in some plants. I've had people on plants that we added back in some meat. This is one of the biggest things that we work on. You know, like I'm a certified nutritionist as well as a functional genomics practitioner. So a few different wells to kind of pull from there. But I'll tell you, it's always going to be one of the first conversations I have with them because, like I said at the beginning of the call, this is an epigenetic input. Everything eats, and we have to make sure that we're giving our body the right information because the alternative is giving it the wrong information 3 times a day, every day. Well, we can't meet our goals and be successful if we're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that framing of giving your body information 3 different times a day because it really it circles with what Dr. Varden discussed in that your genes influence how you receive food, but then your food influences how your genes are going to be expressed. And so there's this element of talking with your body through food 3 plus times a day, right? Depending on genes, right? And depending on snacking and appetite genes. We haven't yet touched on that. And I want to make sure, Dr. Varden, I want to talk to you about leveraging gut biome. But after that, perhaps the 3 of us explore, what the audience talked about in this. It's one thing to know what your genes tell you about your diet. It's another thing to actually apply it. So maybe after Dr. Varden, we ask you for your example. We'll dive into that a little bit. So, Dr. Varden, talk to me about how your awareness of little buggies, all the buggies that live within us, our happy little biome. It thrills me to no end to know that I'm more bug than human. Talk to me about how your awareness of a patient's biome really influenced the diet advice that you were giving them.
Well, let me do this in like a mini case study presentation. Okay. And in this particular situation, I had a 38-year-old woman. She had presented with some chronic bloating, intermittent diarrhea, fatigue, brain fog. Sound familiar? Yeah. She's not the only one like this, but definitely representative. And unfortunately, standard stool tests, blood tests were inconclusive. They really weren't showing what was going on, and her doctors didn't really have a clue. She had tried gluten-free, low FODMAP diets, and nothing really seemed to provide lasting improvement. So what we did is we had her take our Gut 360 premium test. And what we did is that allowed us to really look at that microbiome diversity, look at the phylums, the families, families like Bacteroidetes, Firmicutes, Proteobacteria, Ascomycota. These are very important. Very briefly, Bacteroidetes, very important in the breakdown of carbohydrates, these polysaccharides, into smaller parts that really this works into the short chain fatty acids, giving us things like butyrate. Okay, very beneficial. Firmicutes, they shine with the breakdown of fats. Okay, they also, help to break down carbohydrates, but that's really where they shine is that fat breakdown, and also helping to create short chain fatty acids. Proteobacteria, this is something that we all have some, but when they are larger in number, it's reflective of inflammation. more gut and systemic inflammation. And ascomycota are just the a particular grouping of fungi that work beneficially with the body. So in this particular client, her levels were off of these families. They were in dysbiosis. She had a lot of proteobacteria, a lot of inflammation. And what ended up happening is that when we started looking a little closer at the beneficial bacteria, these commensal bacteria, especially she was very low in things like lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, okay, and overgrowth, like I said, of these opportunistic pathogenic species that created the inflammation, depleted in Akkermansia. Akkermansia muciniphila, these keystone species, again, very, very important in allowing the gut to regenerate and to be strong, to not have leaky gut. Okay, because if you have leaky gut, you're going to have leaky brain. So the intervention that we looked at multi-strain probiotics tailored for her deficiencies. Okay, not just throwing any and all out there, but we wanted to make sure to bring up the numbers of what she was low in. We looked at adding in prebiotic fibers to help increase that microbiome diversity, feeding the good guys, starving the bad guys. Temporarily removed sugar, alcohols, processed foods. We really wanted to not feed the bad guys, not promote that inflammation, gave her polyphenol-rich foods and fermentable foods, really targeted antimicrobial herbal extracts, especially for overgrowth in some of these species. And I'll tell you, within 6 weeks, bloating, diarrhea resolved, energy increased, cognitive symptoms, the brain fog diminishing, felt much better. When we did her follow-up testing, it showed higher bifidobacterium, improved diversity, the rebalance of the ratio from Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes was back. I mean, the symptom relief, she just felt so much better. She was able to reintegrate foods that she loved, that were good for her and matched her DNA. But because her gut was off, she was unable to eat those because of the sensitivities. So this is why it's very important to look at both and to integrate both for treatment, for healing. And it just goes to show how gut biome testing, really helps with that data-driven, individualized protocol. So very, very important.
I think one of the things that has been both fascinating me as well as giving me great elation is the growing ability for us being testers, us being doctors, to look at a biome sample. So to look at someone's biome and then not only be able to support in the moment with things that are currently there. So in what Dr. Varden just discussed, this picture of bloating, et cetera, and loose stool, but also to look at how the biome is influencing future health outcomes, right? So what do I mean by that? I saw someone in the chat mentioned they have a concern of Parkinson's, right? And Parkinson's is one example that there's great amount of data and research coming out saying that while Parkinson's is multifactorial, meaning many things will lead up to you having Parkinson's, it's not just one thing, the gut is part of that. And we are starting to identify gut patterns that predispose people towards the risk of Parkinson's, right? So again, this is not to say it means you will definitely get it, but we know that there's certain patterns of bacteria that will bring about different conditions. So for example, we have a lot of research on mood, right? And how certain bacterial patterns can increase depression or increase anxiety. We have a lot of data around muscle pains. We have a lot of data around the skin. We have a lot of data around a lot of gut stuff, right? Obviously, conditions within the gut, not including bloating, but like the IBSs and the IBDs of the world, right? We have some really, really cool information. And so I think I love Dr. Varden's case because it really speaks to the quick benefit of it. But I also like what computers are doing and research is doing in the sense of we can look into the crystal ball of what the patterns within the gut are and then really work towards that end of changing patterns so that you don't acquire, so that you have a pattern that gives you health as opposed to a pattern that unfortunately would dispose you to a certain condition, right? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, um, guys, right? Let's talk about how we go about actually applying this. So let's pretend someone in the audience, they've done their DNA 360, so close. They've done their DNA gut 360. So they know their DNA, they know not only their current patterns, but future looking patterns through their gut 360. Let's talk about how we actually apply it. Because all three of us know how it's one thing to know something, it's a very different thing to do it. Justin, genetically speaking, rap to me. Give me some wisdom. How do we leverage our genes to go about actually applying this stuff?
I love this part of the conversation because I call it education versus application, right? We can sit here and educate ourselves all day until we get our boots on the ground. Nothing is actually going to manifest and be created. There's a really important concept called clinical correlation that I always have to start with, right? So let's say you were to sign up for a program with yours truly. You're going to be filling out a relatively sizable questionnaire about your current habits, right? Like what your body currently is like, what your health history is, what's your supplement intake look like, and what do you normally eat? Because that gives me that baseline to tweak and to know, like, okay, I can now align this with your genes. I can align that with your genes. So I like to know what they're sort of coming in with and presenting with first and foremost. Once I know that, well, now we're off to the races. I take that DNA 360, big, beautiful document that it is, and I just start picking stuff and figuring stuff out. An interesting thing is that if they have some sort of a eating issue, right, an eating disorder, one of the things that I like to do, and this is a fun little FGP tip I'm going to give everybody, is I look at the mood and behavior section and I actually pair it with the diet and nutrition section. Right. So, like, for example, if you have like these binging tendencies, well, there's a couple of different areas that I'm going to look at. In the diet report, there's really important genes like FTO and MC4R. Those have all to do with snacking tendencies, satiety signals, right? If you're dysregulated for those, then yeah, you're likely going to be one of these people who's just genetically wired to seek out food. Myself, Dr. K, maybe Dr. Laura, I'm not sure. But what I do as a practitioner is I look at that. If they're dysregulated there, I also look at their dopamine pathway. That's in your mood and behavior section, because if you're genetically also wired to have addictive tendencies, binging tendencies, but your satiety mechanism is also off, these are the little connection points that you can find in your DNA 360. Because now it's pretty likely that food is going to be one of those vices for you. And oftentimes I see it clinically speaking. So I look at the whole map. There's really not one gene that I value over another, but the whole thing kind of matters. Like it matters how your gut detoxes. That's a gene called GSTM1. It matters how your liver detoxes. That's GSTT1. All of these things contribute to the digestive picture and therefore how your body is going to utilize the information you give it, being your food. We have normally a whole call just about diet, right? Because it's too important to just have kind of a poo-poo conversation about it and just be like, yeah, eat this and don't eat that.
So punny, a
That
poo-poo
was the
conversation.
funniest thing tonight.
Good, good dad joke there, Justin.
Yeah, I am a dad and I make horrible jokes all the time. But within that conversation, right, I look at a few things. I look at the gut detox, like everything that I just mentioned. Then I look at the TCF7L2 because I have to know what the insulin response looks like. Then we dive right into the macros, right? So there's APOA2, that's for lipid metabolism. There's AMY1, that's salivary amylase gene for starch metabolism. And then we have this great panel for micronutrients, right? We look at vitamin C, we look at vitamin D. Dr. Laura mentioned vitamin A, beta carotene to retinol conversion, super important. And then we also look at zinc, right? So there's a few different things that we can use to sort of add in different dietary sources. Like, oh, there's a gene called SLC30A8. That's the zinc transport gene. If
Mhm.
that's suboptimal, well, now we know we better go ahead and add something on purpose, not necessarily a supplement, but maybe it's some pumpkin seeds. Maybe it's some oysters, right? We can sort of dial in even the micronutrient sources from there. And then sensitivities, right? That's another really important thing to look at because sensitivities are sort of a moving target, just like the gut microbiome is a moving target. As the terrain changes with your mucosal barrier, your acid levels, etc., your sensitivities will change right along with it. But if it is a
Mhm.
genetic sensitivity, right, like for example, a gene called MCM6, that's to do with lactose tolerance. And the way I remember that, when I was learning functional genomics, I made all these funny little sayings to do with the letters. And MCM6, what did I call it? My cow's milk. It was something stupid like that. So I remember this was the
I
lactose
love it.
gene. But genetically encoded issues there, that's always going to be an
Mhm.
intolerance for you, right? So that's not so much of a moving target in the way a normal sensitivity is. I mean, you can alter it with enzymes and different things. But I look at a whole giant map with regard to the DNA 360. You guys do anything different? Did I miss anything with that whole conversation?
Yeah.
Wow, that was great. And actually even looking at the combinations, like for fat, how much saturated fat as compared to monounsaturated fat someone should have, utilizing and looking at the ApoA2 gene, at the ApoE, taking a look at that, how these come together, which deal with fat metabolism, how this is going to go,
Mhm.
is going to affect the fat amount that you would be taking, or if you should have like reduced saturated fats, or if you would do better on moderate fats. And that can help indicate whether you could do well on a keto type diet or not.
Yeah.
Other things that I also take a look at is the HLA genes, the family of
Mm.
genes dealing with gluten sensitivity, celiac, sensitivity genes. And it's being aware that even if in your genes, so again, diet nutrition section, and it would be one of the sub reports that go through your HLA genes.
Carbohydrate.
Thank you. That even if you have normal gluten sensitivity, but you are eating, you know, uh, gluten or other things, and you're having bad reaction, a lot of times it's the
Mhm.
toxins that are in gluten that, unfortunately, that we in the US and even Canada spray on, the wheat products, not only for as an herbicide, but also as a finishing agent to dry it. And so we have sensitivities on that. And that's where, like Justin was saying, looking at your detoxification pathways to see the sensitivity of that. It really is looking at all the stars in the constellation and putting it all together in this
Mhm.
beautiful picture that they do all interconnect.
Yeah.
But Justin,
Yeah.
you did a fantastic, very thorough job.
Thank you.
Amazing.
I love that Justin comes with the dad jokes and Dr. Varden comes with the grandma encouragements. Dr. Varden recently added to her grandma status. And so I see the grandma come through in you all the more, and I love it.
Thank you.
I do want to transition into questions and answers but before I do that, I do want to just make a quick comment on something I'm seeing in the chat. Audience, we're so close. In the chat, Denise was saying that discovery of the snacking gene really gave her awareness around some of her partner's or her husband's eating behaviors. And I think when I think through diet, I think one of the strongest things that our panels can do outside of obviously being like you're not someone that maybe genetically should be doing keto, outside of that, I think one of the best things that can actually do is shift our relationship with food. Because I think a lot of times, especially people who
Mm.
have been doing those yo-yo diets, an audience, I saw a lot of people, who said they've done many different diets. I think, unfortunately, what diet culture sets us up to is have this very adversarial relationship with food, right? It becomes this thing where I got to eat 3 times a day and I better eat like this. And if I don't, my health is going to explode. But how come I can't stick to my diet? Because I'm always hungry and I'm always this and I'm always that, right? I think one of the strongest things that are knowing your genes and knowing your biome, both things that influence what you're craving and what you want to be eating, it shifts it from this like I'm failing because I don't have willpower to this comment of, well, maybe I do have the snacking gene. Cool. Now that I know that, I just have to plan differently. Or maybe, like Dr. Arden's patient, maybe I have a biome that is really making me crave sugar. So it's actually not me that is craving sugar. It's just my biome. So I got to shift it and then I'll stop craving sugar. It changes that relationship. And from an application perspective, at least, I think that shift where you're focused on, let me address the root cause, my gene, my biome, as opposed to let me be upset with myself because I keep falling off the proverbial bandwagon. I think at least, in my mush and my gush, that tends to be one of the best things that comes out of this sort of support and counseling. In the how do we actually do this? How do we apply what we're learning? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
All
great
right.
point. You've got the mush and
Yeah.
gush. I got the dad jokes. Laura's got the grammar encouragement. You just sparked something in me when
Love
you were
it.
talking about that, because like
Mm.
I think that when it comes to the snacking gene thing, it's like it kind of stems back to what I said right at the beginning of the call, that we have 24/7 availability of food now, right? So it's like that's why in 2025 the snacking gene is such a problem. And I think that one of the things that I tend to work on with people, and I've mentioned this before, I try to get people doing a gratitude practice before their meals or surrounding their meals. And it's not a throwaway suggestion. Like this literally helps to activate parasympathetic activity and just give you that relationship with the food. It's a funny little ancestral thing too, because our ancestors didn't have to have a gratitude practice surrounding their food because it was so hard to get, right? Like there was just an inherent gratitude practice because they had to go and work and pick it or kill something, and they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So when they finally had that food in front of them, I think it was just natural for our species to be like, God, I'm so grateful for this. Like, yes, thank you. I got it today. Right. Where now, because it's available at every street corner, we can just go get it. So the gratitude surrounding our food, I think that it's impacted our relationship deleteriously. So if you
Mm,
on purpose can add that back in, especially if you've got that suboptimal MC4R like I do and Dr. K does, that can go a pretty long way to restoring that relationship and that respect for the food itself, because it's here to nourish
mm.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, to kind of underscore that with science, um, there was a study done a little while ago that looked at people, they were eating the same meal. And the difference between the two groups of people is one group was stressed when they were eating the meal,
Mm.
and the other group was relaxed when they were eating the meal. And the group, and I believe they took blood markers afterwards. So they really looked at how much of that meal actually came into body. And the group that was relaxed when they consumed that meal had better parameters. They had better blood sugar spiking, so lower effectively, and they had better evidence of nutrition coming into body compared to that stress group that had higher blood spikes as well as less nutrition coming into the body. And this is an older one. And it really speaks to, I think, Justin, the idea of gratitude, but also how the nervous system, right? How connected the nervous system is to our gut and how that then influences. That's another kind of parameter that influences between genes, buggies, and then nervous system, how we receive that food and make use of it. Yeah, so thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Justin. I appreciate you. And I know Dr. Varden's just tickled pink because I know vitamin G is her favorite.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, audience, we are going to be jumping into the questions and answers. And if you hold on till the end of tonight's webinar and through the questions and answers, I'll be picking one that will be getting a super secret prize. And so whoever's getting the super secret prize, I'd ask that make sure you email CEO at thednacompany.com. We need to know your name. We need to know your address so that we can ship you something super secret. All right.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. Our first question comes from David, and David is asking, "Can peptides repair the gut?" Um, so I know both of you are really well versed in it. Why don't can maybe one of you offer what exactly ground the audience? What are peptides, and then speak to their ability to support the gut?
Yes. Well, peptides are small strings of protein. It's just a few amino acids. Okay, and they generally have very specific jobs that they do in the body. So we have utilized in science and pharmaceuticals and everything else, have utilized these peptides as supplementation or, as a prescription. And in particular, can peptides repair the gut? Yes, there are some in particular, and I know Justin and I have talked about this before. One of my favorites is BPC 157. That stands for Body Protection Compound 157. It's actually derived from a gastric peptide. Okay, remember that's a protein. And studies have shown that it can accelerate healing of the intestinal tissues, ulcers, even leaky gut. And really what it does is it helps to promote what we call angiogenesis, new blood vessel formation, and it enhances the cells that we call fibroblasts, so their activity and collagen deposition. And it really is, the evidence is growing for the use of this particular peptide in health. There's a couple different ways that it can be done as far as being introduced in the body. There's an injection, there's also the oral route. So it really kind of depends on, whether you're getting it by prescription. The oral route, you do not need by prescription, but that actually has been found to be very good in repair of gut health and the gut itself. Justin, is there another one that that you want to share?
Yeah, so BPC is certainly the first one, and it really, the oral format makes the most sense because you're trying to put it into the gut anyways, right? That's where it's going to go. I mean, if you're going to try to inject for an injury site, then injection is appropriate, but all things gut related, that makes the most sense. Another great one would be GHK copper peptide. The more that I've looked into that one, the more I'm like, stem cell activation, it improves collagen formation. It's very anti-inflammatory, even I believe slightly antimicrobial as well. So that's a fantastic one. Lorazepam, that's a good one. Trying to think if there's anything else gut specific. I mean, the thing about peptides is, to Dr. Laura's point, there's a high amount of specificity, right? So you can use them for all kinds of different, things because they're intelligent almost, you would say, right? So the different ones associated with the gut, definitely BPC, GHK, lorazepam. Then you would typically add in your normal stuff, right? Bone broths,
Right.
glutamine, colostrum. Like, it's not just a peptide only thing. But also know what's going on with your gut, because you can actually test for mucosal barrier issues as well by looking at things like zonulin, histamine to DAO ratio. There's a thing called a lactulose to mannitol challenge that you can utilize as well. There's a lot of different ways you can look in there. So I would recommend doing that prior to hopping on $10,000 worth of peptides, but I'm a fan of them personally.
And
Yes.
I would also offer, I think peptides can be an important part of a treatment plan, but I would never want to take them in a solution format, meaning solution being forevermore. I would really leverage them to kind of support gut healing, but in parallel to that, in parallel to kind of that gain you make with those peptides, really adjusting diet, really adjusting kind of lifestyle so that you're not reliant on them. you're more reliant on those 3 messages a day of meals that are coming into your body. Yeah. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Marianne has our next question, and this one's kind of a fun one in my mind because I think Marianne's asking after the anti-inflammatory diet, and I imagine there's going to be 3 different definitions of what the anti-inflammatory diet is. So I like this question. So Marianne's saying, can you discuss what the anti-inflammatory diet is, and then how that's specific to individuals? And so I think there's an element of she's answering her own question. So guys, let's talk about the concept, at least, of the anti-inflammatory diet, and then how genes and how biome can really further personalize that.
It's
Well,
so dependent. Sorry, Dr. Laura. We're all
that's okay.
itching to answer this one. Um, it is absolutely an individual thing because you need to first identify what's causing the inflammation, right? Like we've done a lot of webinars about inflammation, and I always say that it's playing a game called Identify the Arsonist. That's what I call it in my twisted head. Because it's like for you, it might be lactose causing inflammation. For another person, it might be cortisol causing inflammation. Like literally, when you become really cortisol dominant, the mast cells create tumor necrosis factor alpha and histamines, and there's a lot of inflammation that can come just from nervous system dysregulation. That's what Dr. K was talking about earlier in the call. So to me, there's no such thing as a very like just anti-inflammatory diet you can give everybody. There's general guidelines that would be more species appropriate, like I would say a Mediterranean diet, a autoimmune paleo diet. Those are great places to start. But without actionable information from looking at your gut 360, looking at your genes, DNA 360, looking at microbiome from the lens of liver and mucosal barrier, that's how you really find it. But I would start where it starts, right? Start with cutting out what we all know is poisonous and then move forward from there. Dr. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, really, I mean, the ultimate goal is to reduce that chronic low-grade inflammation, that is causing the underlying cause that can drive the majority of conditions like autoimmunity, cardiovascular disease, neurodegeneration, gut disorders, all of these things. And I love, Justin, how you said, hey, you need to find that arsonist. What is that trigger? And a lot of times that works into elimination. There are general principles for an anti-inflammatory diet, whole unprocessed foods, colorful foods, omega-3 fatty acids, polyphenols. But again, even some what we would consider superfoods can actually be inflammatory for you. So this is where that, doing some testing and really asking all the questions, asking the good questions, and keeping track in the food mood poop journal and different aspects can be very, very useful.
Yeah. Guys. All right, our next question is coming in from Sue, and I like this question because it's thinking a little bit outside the box and really playing on the let us treat the person versus just the symptom. Beside genes in the biome, does hormonal status play into efficient nutrition? And they're commenting that from their experience, menopause really changed how their body and their health were. Namely, their cholesterol and glucose are kind of like insulin diabetes levels. So Sue, as your body has taught you already, the answer is yes. And Dr. Varden, I guess, do you want to dive a little bit into that one?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such an excellent question. And yeah, it is very real. Hormone status absolutely plays a major role in how efficiently nutrition works in the body because, yeah, the genes give us the blueprint. The microbiome interacts constantly with food, but hormones, they're the traffic controllers that they decide how nutrients get used, stored, excreted, and that is going to affect how that works. And especially for women in menopause, when our estrogen tanks, estrogen helps to regulate cholesterol, glucose, vascular health. So of course that is going to be affecting, because when estrogen drops, LDL cholesterol can rise, HDL may fall, all of these different things. Insulin sensitivity decreases, blood sugar is harder to control, fat distribution shifts, more visceral fat, that around the abdomen, which in itself is pro-inflammatory. So yeah, absolutely. It's things may need to shift some as you go through these hormonal transitions. But the nice thing is that there are strategies to support that. So, again, knowing the genes is really, one of the most important things, and then testing to see where are your current levels, and then what buttons do we need to push to help support.
Yeah. And for those in the audience that aren't menopausal, I'll just quickly speak to men, and then I'll quickly speak to females who are still have a menstrual cycle. For men, your hormones per se aren't going to change as much as your counterpart females will. But two things to keep in mind. First thing, as you age, hormone levels will change, and that will impact how you receive food. It's going to be a lot more gradual. So, something just to be mindful with your practitioner as you go back, as your body starts to change, something to consider, right? As well as seasonally, too, right? Your levels of testosterone, amongst a few other things, at least, and I'm talking to North America here. If you're outside of that, insert this, but within the winter, right? Within those colder months, you're going to have a little bit less testosterone relative to the summer. So also keep in mind that throughout the year, you're going to be cycling as well, not as markedly as the females on the call. So, females on the call, women on the call with a period, be very mindful that over the course of your period, your cravings, as well as how you receive food, is also going to change, right? Typically, the first half of the cycle, so from bleeding until ovulation, there's going to be lesser appetite and better glucose control. Whereas the second half of the cycle, you're really going to need those carbs, and there's going to be much more plentiful appetite and need for carbs. So again, if you're cycling, just remember that those considerations are really important to you as well. And if you're looking to dive into this sort of thing, especially the personalization, don't hesitate to reach out to us, because there's so many different things that need to be considered in regards to hormones. Yep.
And we never want to forget about cortisol. That's the stress hormone. Okay. And this is something that it can affect anyone at any time based on, lifestyle conditions or major issues, major life events that can increase stress and cortisol. And that is going to also affect gut biome, your eating habits, mood and behavior, like what Justin was talking about, your relationship with food. It can enhance, weaknesses or tendencies in that respect. So,
Merci, Medell. All right. Sue has our next question. Sue's asking, how successful have your programs been when people learn about their DNA and applying this information to their specific plan? I'm really proud of my clinicians, so I'm going to say very successful, because I have the vantage point of being able to see all their work. But Dr. Varden, Justin, why don't you talk to kind of your lives before DNA Company compared to now, and some of the the efficacy change that you've seen now that you're incorporating DNA and gut biome testing into how you're telling people to navigate their diet and their health?
I'll start, Dr. Laura. So I was already a practicing nutritionist prior to all this, right? I was a personal trainer. I was managing nutritional supplement stores. I was just doing that whole thing. So I was regularly writing meal plans, and I was doing it with just kind of ancestral wisdom, right? Like, I was a primal health coach already prior to doing the functional genomics thing. And I was doing decently, you know what I mean? Because I know how to give people good advice, hydrate, this, that, the other thing. But once I was able to add in this, it's like I had a whole nother filter that I could plug my already existing knowledge through for people. And I could go, well, why was this working a little bit less for this person than it was for that person? And it's just like, it was the Wild West. Other than that, I had to guess. Well, do I have to adjust the calories? Are they not sleeping well? Like, what is it, right? So now when I've got a client, I always say this: when a client comes to me now, I know more about that client than 99% of practitioners on planet Earth because I have the DNA 360. So I know what their anxiety pathway is and their dopamine pathway, and I know what their cardiovascular red flags are. I know so much prior to even talking about them that when they show up, it's like I'm talking to my best friend. Like I know everything about them, everything I need to know anyways. So adding in the functional genomics element really, practitioners on the call, I'm telling you, this is going to take your practice to a whole nother level because you're simply operating with a level of data and you have wells to draw from that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And when a client shows up in your office, you're going to understand how their body works on a very high level, right? So when you talk about nutrition, when you have these exercise conversations, you're doing it associated with how their body is wired and what's going to make the most sense, right? You're not guessing anymore. That whole part is done with. So like now, if I go to write a meal plan, I've got way more data to go off of. I'm not going to put someone blanketly on a ketogenic diet, like I said earlier, right? So the genes, frankly, they transformed what my practice was. And in my own life as well, getting my own genes done, I was like, oh, that's why that happened, or that's why this is like this, right? So this is a reliable set of data that you can use to understand people much better and yourself much better as well.
Yeah, I mean, Justin, wow, that is so beautiful, and I know what great work that you do, and I ditto that. You know, these are the types of things that I do with my clients, and have found tremendous insights that really have helped move the needle for them that has been immobile before. Um, but I'm going to shift this a little bit more toward the personal aspect, that the knowledge that I have learned from my own DNA, implementing things in, functional nutrition, because I actually have a certification in functional nutrition as well. But having me be the example to live like that, that has helped me move through menopause much more calmly. That has helped with stabilizing my weight, to help in my health, but it has filtered to my family, to my ex-husband, and how he has the health he has gained, and my mother, 82 years old, on no medication, healthy as a horse, and just has energy to burn. My kids, taking my daughter, who's a personal trainer, in really good shape, to that next level, and helping her, get pregnant, have a healthy pregnancy for my new grandson that I helped deliver earlier this month, and helping her transition back, as she's going through postpartum. All of these things touching the lives of those most close to me, and then generating out to those that I see in front of me every day, that I am able to help. That's what makes it all worth it. That's what powers me to do what I do every single day.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Dr. Varden. I have a question from Mickey. Mickey is asking, or making, saying, they have a profile where it's, this is a genetic profile. It's flagging them for insulin sensitivity, and it's also flagging them, saying they shouldn't really have a high fat diet. And I'm seeing this question repeated a few different times, so I'm going to leverage Mickey's, but Cindy, Sheila, and a few others, this kind of captures yours. They're making comments of like, based on this gene presentation, right? What should my plate look like? What should I be eating? It kind of sounds like I should be eating nothing. And FYI, the answer is no, not nothing. What do I go, how do I go about doing this and creating a plate, right? And so, guys, I wonder if you can speak to, what it would look like to work with a patient, right? Because we can't give medical advice away on these things, so we can't really speak to specific genes. If you want it's kind of more personalized support, please do reach out to us. But guys, what do you do when someone approaches you and you see a few suboptimal genes that feel a little bit contradictory, right? You shouldn't have carbs, but you also shouldn't have fat. How you go about supporting the person there?
I'll start. So there's a few things that I would have to also know, right? Like I like to look at, for example, the ApoE gene because that is also relevant for like saturated versus the monounsaturated fat sources, right? Some omega-3s, some avocado, that sort of a thing. The AMY1 gene is also very important there because if that's optimal or suboptimal, we're gonna have to get our energy from somewhere, right? So we're either deriving our energy from carbohydrates and we're doing something called glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, that whole thing, or we're deriving it from fats, which is called beta oxidation. So we're needing to nourish one of those over another. But I also try to get something called metabolic flexibility going in these people. And there's a few tools that I use for that. So let's say you are suboptimal for fatty acid intake because of your ApoA2 and your TCF7L2. Well, we can utilize ingredients like L-lipase. We can utilize things like carnitine that actually helps push the fat into the mitochondria to be burned. We can utilize things like fasting. We can also use, HCl and different things to just help digest fats that little bit better. This is great to also have your gut 360 because then you can also see what a lot of the things Dr. Varden was talking about earlier. Where there's a will, there's a way, right? There's always a way that you can improve digestion of different nutrients, but it needs to be a tailored plan. It's a little bit difficult to speak to it without, like I mentioned, knowing even liver status and all kinds of different things. But if you're suboptimal for starches, but you want to include some of them, maybe it's a matter of only eating them after your workout, right? That's called carb backloading. And your body is going to use them a lot more efficiently if you just burn through all of your glycogen, right? You could also cook and cool starches, and that turns them into a resistant starch. And by the way, if you reheat them again after that, the structure of the carbohydrate doesn't turn back to a normal starch. It stays resistant. So resistant starches tend to line the intestine and they don't have nearly as much of an insulin and blood glucose spiking effect. So that's one of those things that we can do to manage it. Maybe it's a matter of managing blood sugar with things like apple cider vinegar, Ceylon cinnamon, berberine, ketone esters. You can do digestive enzymes before and after. There's a lot of little tweaks and things that you can do for that. So it's really a matter of having a pretty sizable conversation about really all of the elements. What are you currently eating? What's your current supplement stack look like? And how do we tweak and kind of manufacture the best case scenario? So I guess that's my way of saying where there's a will, there's a way, but I need to know so much about you that it's a bit tough in this format. Dr. Laura, what were you going to say on that note?
Well, actually, I mean, even taking it more to that 30,000-foot view is, first of all, asking, what are your goals? What are your pain points? What is going on that you want to fix, change, optimize, so that way we know where to focus. And it also helps me to then look at your genes through a particular lens on going, okay, here's, where I'd like to focus. And it also provides me opportunity for questions, more questions to dig in to find out all that more that you're talking about, Justin. So that way I can get a better idea of the landscape on, what are those triggers? What's going on? And I always go over those three things. Are you sleeping? Are you pooping? And is your blood sugar regulated? Because those need to be taken care of before we can start turning the smaller dials. And of course, the DNA is going to be extremely informative in what's going on, as well as these other tests like the Gut 360 Premium to see what the current terrain is, blood work, all of these different aspects. They all are pieces of the overall puzzle that gives information on how can I best help you for you to reach your goals, for us to make, to address these pain points that you have.
Mm-hmm. Merci. All right, John has a question, and I'll speak to this one because I this hurts my heart. And John, you're probably going to get our super secret prize because my heart goes out to you for this. I have a predisposition towards gluten sensitivity and risk of celiac. So, what John's talking about is we look at the HLA gene. This is going to be in your DNA 360 diet and nutrition, specifically the
Mhm.
carbohydrate section. We can look into genes and say, do you have a risk of celiac? Do you have a risk of gluten sensitivity? Two different things. And it sounds like
Mhm.
John unfortunately has both, like myself. Um, and John's saying when they have gluten, they get pretty stuffed up in their nose, wondering if they're doing damage to their gut or creating inflammation or what exactly is going on. So, John, first of all, when you have genes for celiac, it doesn't mean you actually have celiac. You do have to get testing. Having a gene, only about 30 to 40% of people with those genes will actually develop celiac. So just one thing to keep in mind, you do have to get tested. But that said, you kind of have a double whammy of both. And so your body is not going to be responding well to gluten, both for a very autoimmune reason. Body identifies it as an attacker and will attack yourself, as well as your gut biome becomes inflamed with direct contact with gluten. So unfortunately, there's really no way around it. And I've seen in many people where this will manifest in different ways, including nasally. And I'll offer up a case example, right? I saw someone that actually came in for incredible sinus problems. We did some testing, including gut, including genes, and we found that they had a presentation like yours and unfortunately mine. And this person was a very staunch European. This person might have been my father. Hi, Dad, and I'm sorry. This person might have been my father. And convincing a European man you no longer get bread, I feel like I deserve a medal because that was very difficult and I totally played the daughter card. But when we were able to get him off of that, right, his nasal problems cleared up, period. And I've known my dad my whole life. I've never seen him without
Mhm.
that. So taking that out resolved this 100%, as well as resolved pain and a few other things because it was truly a problem within him. So just keep mindful of that. And now this European man who I had to, pry bread from his cold dead hands is now very actively avoiding it. So it's one of those things that genes and biome can tell you to do something. And then once you realize the benefit of it, you will sustain yourself. So you're getting our super secret prize because gluten and croissant are my demigod. And I feel sorry for anyone that needs to be removing it, but it might be something you want to consider because your body is telling you you need to consider it. So, John, if you want to email CEO at, we will send you a super secret prize that unfortunately will not be a croissant. All right.
And
Um,
chocolate or a chocolate croissant.
oh, look at you
Sorry.
torturing me today. That's okay. That's okay. I still have chocolate, and Dr. Varden knows I have a weak spot for chocolate. All right. Cynthia has our next question. They're just wondering if a whole food, plant-based vegan diet, whole food vegan diet, so a real vegan diet as opposed to like a carbitarian diet, um, if there's certain genes that kind of say you shouldn't be plant-based. We get this question a lot. Dr. Varden, Justin, what are your answers to this one?
I think a well orchestrated plant based diet can be pulled off for the most part, even if you have suboptimal genetic presentation for
Mhm.
things like AMY1, or it depends, like Dr. K was just saying, like how many carbs are you eating and does your body actually deal with carbs well? We do have a gene called FUT2, which some research suggests can influence things like lectin, sensitivities and things like that, on top of the B12 side of things that it also does. So there's kind of
Mm.
a double edged thing going on with that gene. If you have the optimal presentation of FUT2, then some of those people have difficulty digesting things like lectins. What I would say is that I would actually recommend relying more so on food sensitivity testing for this particular diet than I would just the genes on their own, because when you have to derive all of your calories from various plant sources, it's a little bit difficult to really fill your calorie requirements, not knowing if you have a sensitivity to the asparagus or the avocado or whatever it is. So your genes can point you in the right direction, but I would also strongly recommend doing some sort of IgG food sensitivity testing to really just know that, okay, are the plants I'm consuming going to cause inflammation in my gut? Because if not, I think that you can derive a decent amount of your calories there. Then it's a matter of things like protein, right? Are you able to get enough amino acids? Because sarcopenia is a real problem, and I've seen it in a lot of plant-based folks. So, some people land on some sort of a pescatarian thing, right? Where it's like mostly plants, but they'll add in some fish or they'll add in some eggs or something like that just to fill in those nutritional gaps. But those are the only real genes that I look at. I'm really pretty reliant on things like food sensitivities. Dr. Laura, what do you kind of think about that?
Actually, I think that's wonderful. And I would only supplement with the fact of looking at any possible nutrient deficiencies, because this obviously could be a real
Yeah.
issue with people on a vegan or even, vegetarian diet. And so we're talking about things like what Justin mentioned, B12, also iron, calcium, omega-3s, vitamin D, looking at the genes and pathways to say, do you genetically have a problem with the conversion, nutrient uptake, transport of these, and then looking at actual tests, blood tests, micronutrient tests, things like that to say, where are you? How is your diet helping to support these very vital nutrients? Because if you are insufficient or deficient in them, then something definitely needs to be done. There are changes that need to be made, whether it's a shift in diet, like Justin was saying, shifting into a pescatarian, or doing some sort of supplementation, because that can adversely affect downstream effects in many different ways if you are insufficient or deficient.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I worked with a lot of, I was plant-based for a very long time. And so I've worked with a lot of plant-based folk. And theoretically, anyone can be plant-based, but genes really curate how much harder you're going to have to work if you choose that. Because I appreciate it's not always a health decision. It might be a religious or a moral, ethical decision. And so make sure you work with a provider who's very well literate in the plant-based space. And your genes are going to tell you how much extra hard you have to work. It's very difficult for certain genotypes to be plant-based, but not impossible. Yep. All right. Layla, I hope I'm saying that right, is asking after, can you explain the value add beyond um, uh, uh, So can you please add the value add that the DNA Gut 360 offers above and beyond the DNA 360? Yeah, so I'll quickly speak to this one, guys. So the DNA 360 really looks at genes that we've been talking about, like genes that tell you, can you receive carbohydrate well? Do you have a snacking gene? What's your appetite going to be like? That sort of thing. Speaks to very constitutional things. Gut 360 speaks to the little buggos that are in your gut and how the patterns, effectively, how the different communities can culminate to how your health is right now in the moment, as well as how your health can be in the future if you continue with those same patterns. So, for example, we know that there's some patterns associated with depression. There's some patterns associated with osteoporosis, right? And so it's saying that if you have that pattern, it may not mean in the moment you have osteoporosis or depression, but if you don't shift that, research says you're more likely to be developing those sorts of conditions. Okay, so that's kind of the value add. It gives you state of the union of the buggies within you and what that problems that might be causing literally in the moment, as well as if you don't change those patterns, where your body might be going. And then it also, I think the cool thing is, offers very specific suggestions in terms of food and probiotic and medications, etc., that can be beneficial based on whatever's going on there. All right. Um, yeah. Let's see. There's um let's see. The next question we have is Kathy is saying they have been taking, or sorry, we began talking about vitamin A and zinc because we have genes that look into those. Do these nutrients play a role in gut health? There's Kathy is suboptimal in both. I would speculate what Kathy means is they're suboptimal in their ability, their genes for this. So do you want to talk a little to, I think, the nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics of vitamin A and zinc?
Sure. And I mean, vitamin A and zinc are obviously very critical micronutrients. They are very important for gut health. They do work in tandem to maintain gut lining, supporting immune balance, influencing the microbiome. And depending on, well, you said that you are suboptimal in your presentations. So I had mentioned about vitamin A in the very beginning as an example, the BCMO1 gene. So again, that means that you're not so great at converting beta carotene into retinol, that form that we can actually utilize. So in that respect, you need to get it in a form that's already retinol or retinol palmitate, which is generally from animal products. A great form is cod liver oil, very high in vitamin A in the form that we can actually utilize. And vitamin A is very essential for maintaining that epithelial lining of the gut. It helps stimulate the production of mucins, which is that protective mucus layer, keeping pathogens and toxins from crossing into the bloodstream. And definitely is very helpful when we're talking about the regulation, the balance of immune responses, to help avoid, autoimmunities, chronic inflammation, different things like that. So getting into zinc, zinc is a cofactor for tight junction proteins that help seal those spaces between the gut cells. And when there is deficiency, that can lead to impaired barrier, increased intestinal permeability, that leaky gut, okay, which is linked to food sensitivities, autoimmunity, systemic inflammation, things like that. And zinc is required for DNA synthesis and cell repair. And in the gut, that can translate to faster healing of damaged mucosa. So, for the zinc transport gene that we're talking about, the SLC30A8, this does work in the pancreas to help with insulin response. There are aspects of zinc that very important, and this does work into overall health. So, making sure that you're eating foods rich in zinc or taking a zinc supplementation. But again, we are reductionizing it into two genes. So definitely, I would say, if you are having issues, speak with a practitioner. Make sure that these things are warranted. What are your current levels? Is the food that you're eating providing you what you need for that? This works into what Justin so beautifully explained earlier about, having those questions answered, knowing what's going on, having all of this information. So, but yes, vitamin A and zinc both play a role in gut health.
Can I add to that really quick, Dr. Kit or Dr. Laura?
Please.
Interesting thing. So, zinc, especially zinc carnosine, is like a really good form for repairing the gut. To get real good results, a lot of people will take a pretty big dose of zinc carnosine. And there's an interesting thing because a lot of zinc supplementation, you have to be aware of copper levels as well, right? Because there's kind of a competitive receptorship pathway there. So what I mentioned earlier in the call when we were talking about peptides, and I said GHK copper peptide, the copper in copper peptide would in fact balance out the zinc carnosine, right? So that's a great one to combo if you use like a higher dose of zinc carnosine, which some people can get a bit of, upset stomach from it. So I don't recommend jumping on a giant crazy dose, unless you're used to it. But you can actually use those in tandem because the GHK copper peptide is a very, very powerful tool in and of itself. but the copper by nature balances out the zinc for the receptorship issue there. So cool little 1-2 biohacking trick with that one.
Sweet. Thanks, guys. Tina is asking for a list of peptides that we were discussing. So Justin is going to offer that into the chat for you, Tina. The last question that, and also just one other question, this is a bit of a side. Denise is asking if they can use an old test kit. Denise, if you want to reach out to us at CEO at the DNA company, we can support with that there. So the last question we have this evening is from Julia. So Julia is saying that within their family, there's a really long history of diverticulitis and intestinal cancer, so a lot of GI issues, and they feel like they themselves also have some GI issue and have been diagnosed with it as well, both overtly with IBS as well as some side hustles that the gut will also influence, like depression. They're struggling to find a solution, and please tell me how you would start to unpack all of this. And they're kind of commenting that very reasonably there's a lot of pressure and fear and emotions and overwhelm and all the other fun things there. So Julia, I'll comment off the bat, we're not gonna be able to give you a medical plan. But what I'd really encourage, and maybe Justin, Dr. Varden, what you guys can speak to is how important it is to find the right practitioner when someone comes to you with this kind of long list, and a scary list, right? It's really scary to kind of come up to a practitioner and be like, I'm not well, can you help me? Do you want to talk Julia through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so there's so many potential moving elements to stuff like this, right? When you have complex health issues, you really want to get someone who's got like a pretty well-rounded and zoomed out viewpoint of how the human body works and all the different complexities there. Because if we were to zoom in really far and just talk about the diverticulitis and kind of not talk about the rest of your detox pathways, the rest of your nutrient pathways, then we're really leaving out a lot of pieces to that particular puzzle, right? So, like what I was mentioning earlier, like, we have genes associated with the liver and how well the liver detoxifies itself. Well, the liver is what creates bile. The bile goes to the gallbladder and it circles around in something called enterohepatic circulation. And that has a lot to do with how your body can digest things, fats, different things that it needs to digest. So, if there's other genetic weak points, what I'm saying is there could be trickle down effect into how well the intestines work and how well your digestion works. And I would want a practitioner that's got that functional hat on all the time and is looking at all the different healing opportunities that they can possibly target as a full constellation. That alone makes it so that we can get a little bit closer to the problem. If you can actually get the basic function of the body working better in all these different areas, then things tend to start correcting themselves. And when you have a more specified, then zoomed in plan, it's going to work a heck of a lot better because you've addressed a lot of these other suboptimal areas. So the functional hat, I think, is the main thing you want to look at because there could be effects from other systems of the body that are creating some of those issues. I remember Brock Lesnar had diverticulitis, and it was because he never ate vegetables and he was on just a crazy high protein diet, right? And that in and of itself, maybe you need more proteolytic enzymes, maybe you need more HCl. I mean, who knows? We're going to look at the gut, we're going to look at the DNA, we're going to have someone come in and have an understanding of all these different moving components. And to me, that's what's going to land you with the best, most well-rounded healthcare plan. Someone like Dr. Laura would be a fantastic option, in my opinion.
Thank you. And honestly, we, all of our practitioners here, we take you where you're at. And I think really it's a matter of simplification. Instead of trying to fix everything at once, focus on one change at a time that you can manage and handle. You want to stabilize the gut lining, looking at your nutrients that we've talked about, things like what Justin had mentioned earlier about glutamine, zinc, carnosine, collagen peptides, vitamin A, all of these different things. We need to stabilize that gut lining. You need to rebalance the microbiome. looking at prebiotics, probiotics, but personalized, because patients with IBS or with gut issues often need gradual introduction. So having someone who can follow you and guide you and be able to pivot and change and adjust as you are moving through this, and really layering in that mental, emotional tools like journaling, meditation, doing some neurofeedback, and also monitoring your markers. Test, don't guess. See how that progression is working. Because, you're not climbing this cliff alone. You are building a path, step by step. Your family history tells us where the pitfalls might be, but your genes, your food, your lifestyle, and mindset give you the powerful levers to change the outcome. Healing the gut also heals the mind, and vice versa. So there is hope.
Yeah. I love that. I love that between the two of you captured very strongly that it's not just going to be family history. It's not just current state. It's a lot of different things. And so the person that is able to orchestrate and conduct and be collaborative is important. All right, audience, we made it. I'm proud of us. Thank you for being here with us today. We hope that this was helpful. We hope that this taught you about why diets don't fit all. We hope that this taught you about nutrigenomics versus nutrigenetics. And we hope that you learned a little bit about how both genes and your biome can influence this sort of thing. Justin, Dr. Varden, thank you so tenderly for being here with us and for sharing your wisdom and for being with the audience and playing all the dad jokes, all the grandma gush. I love it.
Love it.
Yeah. All right, audience, we're so glad that you are here. We do this most nights a week, so keep an eye on your inbox and you will see when we are next back to discuss these fun topics. All right, guys, I think it's time we dance out because when we think of mental health, which influences gut biome, which influences appetite. The best exercise that you can be doing for that is dance. Therefore, we dance out. So, audience, it is time we dance out with you. Next time, we might give our super secret surprise to the person that wants to come on camera at the end of this and dance with us. So, audience, yeah. I think we just found out who our next super secret prize is. Whoever is willing to come up here, act a fool, and dance with us. All right, audience, we're out. We're going to dance. We'll see you next time. Please dance with us because it's important to your mental health. Au revoir, mes amis. Au revoir.
Yes. Thank you.